Coming up on this edition of the Climate Show, we're plugging everything back in, and presto, we're back. We're making the connection. I found Gareth once again. I'm on one side of the world. He's on the other. How you doing, Gareth?
I'm doing very well. Hang on a minute. I'm just going to deal with the wet string here. Your tin can, can you get it? You got the tin can here? I got mine working, okay?
Oh, I've got that way. Yes, I've got it, making the connection. Yes, we're just catching up on this very short edition, well, shorter than usual edition of the Climate Show, catching up on all the latest news. That's all coming up. This episode of the Climate Show is brought to you by hot-topic.co.nz, cyblogs.co.nz, skepticalscience.com, scoop.co.nz and idealog.co.nz.
What good is a drop in the ocean? What good is a drop in the ocean?
Hello and welcome along to the Climate Show, episode number 28, recording this 12th day of September 2012. My name is Glenn Williams, recording here in London, United Kingdom. My co-host, of course, Gareth Renowden, joining me back in New Zealand, in Waipara. Gareth, how you doing?
Hello, good evening and welcome.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing. Instead of doing this in the middle of the afternoon, which is when we always used to talk, there you are enjoying your breakfast coffee, and there's me with a post-prandial pint of wine, but it's not. It's only a little glass. But so welcome, Glenn. How are you getting on in London?
Very well, very well. And obviously there's been a reasonable gap of time since the last show. Last show I think was back in May. Starting to settle in here. It's been an amazing time to be here. Of course, you know, the English summer, you know, how fantastic. Not. Well, actually, it hasn't been so bad over the past few weeks, particularly when the Olympics started. But before that, boy, it was just raining every day. But a good time to be here with the Olympics and all the energy that was going on. I'm told not to expect London to be so positive all the time, but certainly I was definitely feeling that vibe.
I think that's probably right. Yes. Interestingly, your wet summer experience may well turn out to have had a climate relevant sort of angle to it, because one of the consequences of the changes that we're seeing in the Arctic this summer may be a sequence of very wet summers for the British Isles.
Great. That's just what I wanted to hear.
Research that's coming out of the European Centre for Medium Range Forecasting, which actually was linked on the BBC a few days ago, showing that there's a tendency for low levels of sea ice in the Arctic to be associated with a sort of change in the position of the jet stream. So you get a warm Greenland and you get a cool, wet Britain. And that pattern seems to have become pretty much settled in since the big sea ice loss in 2007.
Right. And
given that Britain is not noted for its long, dry summers anyway, to get notably wet summers one after the other, I suspect is not going to go down terribly well with the British psyche.
Well, that's something that I did notice when I got here. You know, everyone was talking about this wet, damp summer that they were having, and that was also being reflected in the media and also on the weather reports as well, where they went not as far as just sort of explaining what the next day and 7 days were going to be, but also the bigger picture, talking about that slipstream, which was further south than it normally should be at that time of the year back in June, causing that warm or that moist air to come over the islands, and normally it should be pushed further north a little bit earlier, and that they were actually talking about that sort of thing and talking about it in the context of climate change, and this could be the pattern of the future. So, and then I found that other people were picking up on this and also talking about it as well, Gareth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the climate change is not some sort of theoretical construct for people who live in the Northern Hemisphere. It's something that's actually happening now, and it's having discernible impacts in Europe and in Greenland and around the Arctic. And as for the sake of people playing cricket in Britain, it's very bad news. If you're going to get wet summers until all the Arctic sea ice is gone, you could be in for a decade of damp. And was it John Lennon wrote, "You'll never get a tan from sitting in the English rain"?
Yeah. They also say you don't come here for the weather either. So I very quickly stopped complaining and focused on sort of the other things that are good about coming to a big city like London.
Well, as you said at the start of the show, we're around about the 12th of September at the moment, and it's just beginning to look as though the melt in the Arctic is slowing down. Every measure of the Arctic ice, both area, extent, and volume, by whoever is measuring, whether it's the National Snow and Ice Data Center or the Danish DMI or the Cryosphere Today people, every single measure has set a new record, and in most cases by a fairly considerable margin over the previous record year, which is 2007. And basically a hell of a lot of sea ice has melted this summer, and this has got consequences. This is not something that's just you can ignore because it's happening in the North Pole and what's up there but a few sort of whales and polar bears and things. Actually, so the interesting thing is that over the next few months, as the ice begins to refreeze up in the Arctic, the water that's warmed up over summer is going to have to lose a lot of heat to the atmosphere. And that heat, as it goes into the atmosphere, is actually going to physically change the pattern of circulation around the Northern Hemisphere. An American scientist called Jennifer Francis, who is doing a lot of work in this area, and I think we may well have mentioned her with Jason Box the last time he was on the show.
Yeah.
The way she puts it is, how can this amount of heat not be affecting the pattern of climate around the Northern Hemisphere? So on the one hand, it seems to be associated with wetter summers for Western Europe, but that's only for the northwestern Europe. You've got to remember that this summer in Spain and Portugal has been incredibly hot with many, many fires. But so it's not. It is just really Britain and the sort of top half of France. The rest of Western Europe's been actually very hot. But over the next couple of months anyway, the heat's going to be lost to the atmosphere. The weather patterns are changing, and one of the consequences for the winter is, if you look at the winters that Western Europe's had over the last 5 years, there have been a number of very, very cold outbreaks of easterly weather, which is always what gives Britain anyway its coldest winter weather, as kind of winds come down from Russia and sort of bring snow across the North Sea and sort of batter London, and then you find that all the trains aren't designed to work because it's the wrong kind of snow.
Or there's leaves on the line. Apparently, I'm looking forward to leaves on the line. Apparently, that's a big problem in October, November.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, they've spent 100 years planting trees all the way around the suburban railway lines of London.
Yeah, exactly.
Only to discover that the leaves are a problem. But there we are. But
just before we
the changes.
I was just going to say, have we reached the ice minimum for this season yet?
Yeah, it's around about now. It's the sort of middle of September. It might carry on going down for another week, or we might be just bottoming out.
Because the reason why I ask is
we are there.
Because you mentioned Jason Box just before, and he tweeted the other day a link to meltfactor.org saying early September Greenland ice reflectivity remains low, some melting remains active. So it's still happening. At least last week.
Yeah, that's right. The very south of the Greenland ice sheet is probably still getting quite a lot of warm weather. So if you track down that picture to the bottom of Greenland, Glenn, you can see down there that one. That's right. You can see the sort of red bits and the pink bits. That's where the melt is likely.
Okay.
And it's interesting that some of the tropical storms and hurricanes that have been moving across the Atlantic are moving up towards Greenland at the moment. And they will carry, a lot of energy up into that area, which will probably fall as rain around the edges of the Greenland ice sheet and enhance the melting in those areas. That said, when you go up a few thousand feet onto the ice sheet itself, it will be snowing.
Right.
And the albedo will be back to normal, because you're getting to the point of the year in September where the days are getting much shorter as you go closer to the Arctic Circle, and at the point where you get beyond the shortest day, the equinox, then you'll start to get permanent darkness in large parts of the Arctic. So yeah, the winter weather aspect, I'm not a betting man, as you know. I have known to occasionally offer small sums of money for minor things of minor interest, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if at some point over the November, December, January period, there wasn't an extreme spell of cold weather for Western Europe, and possibly also for the east coast of North America.
So I'll be heading out to buy a nice big warm coat. But talking actually about North America, of course, they had sort of the opposite to the UK summer, didn't they? They had these heat waves and drought conditions.
Yeah, there have been a huge number of temperature records set in the US over the summer, and it wasn't actually the warmest summer in the US, according to Jeff Masters at Weather Underground. I think NOAA calculated that it came in as the 4th hottest summer ever for the continental USA. But yeah, extreme heat waves, drought, very bad drought in southwestern USA, which, although the hurricane that hit around the sort of Gulf Coast did bring quite good rain to large parts of those areas, it wasn't enough to break the drought in many areas. So yes, it's been a summer of extremes. Another thing that I might, we've had extreme flooding in China. Yeah. We've had the monsoon failure, or a very poor monsoon, bringing very little rain into parts of Asia, which has caused problems for crops. The world is actually flipping from the La Nina weather pattern into an El Nino, and although the El Nino is the pattern of global weather that goes with an El Nino isn't quite there yet, the tropical Pacific is shifting into an El Nino pattern, and that will bring some changes.
Well, so 2011, 2012 should have been a cool year, right? And it kind of wasn't really, was it? But next year should be a hot year. So if this year wasn't as cool as it should have been, one can only imagine what it's going to be like over the next 12 months.
Well, exactly. El Nino years tend to be associated with sort of damaging extremes in terms of floods, and it may well be that 2013's got a few nasty shocks in store for us because of, the El Nino and La Nina weather patterns. They kind of set the pattern of weather around the globe. It's like the globe adjusts to where these large pools of hot water are in the tropical Pacific. They act, if you like, as a kind of mold for the way that the atmosphere flows around the planet. And as you flip from one to the other, so you move these patterns around the globe, and they kind of get locked into it. And then if you lay on top of that the fact that there's a whole lot more energy in the atmosphere now because of climate change, and then you look at what's happening in the Arctic with the reduction in sea ice and the effects that is having on the jet stream, you end up with the potential for a lot more in terms of damaging extreme events. The waggles in the jet stream, because they're bigger and stickier, just to be very non-technical about it, mean that weather tends to stick around for longer and can be more extreme. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. 2012 could well turn out to be the hottest year ever in North America. I think the next few months would have to be record cold months for the USA for 2012 not to be the hottest ever year. But it's unlikely that 2012 will set any records for global temperature. As you say, El Ninos tend to be associated with hotter years, and it looks like 2013 is heading that way. Big question for 2013, given what we've seen with the Arctic this summer, is what will happen to the Arctic ice next year.
Yeah, that's right.
I think most scientists would pick some sort of rebound from the minimum that we've seen this year. But the minimum this year happened without there being any extreme weather. 2007's record was set in a summer that was unusually sunny, and the conditions were absolutely perfect for ice melt. This year was not perfect for ice melt, with the exception of one thing that came along. There was a major kind of low pressure system developed in the Arctic in August, and that had the impact of stirring up the sea and probably melting quite a lot of ice. But that low pressure system was itself a consequence of there being less ice around, because when you've got the ocean covered by a cap of ice, you don't get these low pressures forming. They're very much an oceanic system. So when you get rid of the crust of ice hanging over the Arctic Ocean, you actually predispose these systems to form, or you provide them with energy that enables them to keep going. So yeah, there's a lot of fascinating things to look out for over the next year, but I'm afraid, Glenn, that you've moved into the hot seat, really, because you're where people are going to be feeling the rubber hitting the road.
Certainly looks like it will be in the thick of it here, but wouldn't you say, would it be accurate to say that the melt has taken the experts, or the extent of the melt has taken the experts by surprise, and now we're into uncharted territory? Because aren't we experiencing something that scientists thought we would perhaps experience in 20, 30, 40 years' time?
Yeah, well, that's right. At the time of the 2007 record, the sort of consensus view as expressed by the IPCC in their fourth report in 2007 itself, was that the Arctic summer sea ice wasn't going to be in any real trouble until the end of the century. There was going to be a slow decline, and eventually it would go, but we were looking 80, 90 years away. And then after 2007, scientists began to think, well, it's obviously happening a bit more quickly than that. Maybe we're talking 30 to 40 years. And so I think over the last few years, most of the consensus, and if you look around what the sort of comments that have been made by some of the sea ice scientists over the last month or two, they're still holding on to the idea that it's a sort of 20 to 30 year event. But there's a growing number of people, and in the UK, a scientist called Peter Wadhams from Cambridge University, who's been doing a lot of work on sea ice, and particularly on the volume and thickness of the sea ice. He has been, he believes that because, you see, when you look down from space on the sea ice, what you see is the area, you see the surface of it. And what's been happening from modeling and from the measurements that have been taken, and also now we've got a new satellite flying which is designed to look at the thickness of the sea ice, determine the thickness of the sea ice, we can actually see that the volume has been reducing markedly, even in years when the extent hasn't seemed to change very much. So that ice has been getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and it may well now be at the point where it's so thin that just an ordinary summer with a little kick here and there is enough to cause really large reductions in extent. And so you've got kind of two camps emerging. You've got the more cautious scientists who are still holding on to maybe 20, 30, 40 years before the Arctic is effectively free of sea ice in summer. And you're beginning to see an emergence of a rather more aggressive set of predictions from scientists who perhaps particularly have been looking at the volume of the sea ice. I am on record on Hot Topic as having projected forward from the volume data that we had a couple of years ago. And I think we'll be very, very fortunate indeed to have summer sea ice greater than 1 million square kilometers at minimum before the end of the decade. It could be as soon as the next couple of years, Glenn. So
that leads us on to this article that was on Climate Code Red that says that as the system changes, as we see these extreme events and extreme melting in the Arctic, that the science also has to adjust to that as well.
Yeah, the message is that the sorts of things that the science is telling us are so far away from the cautious consensus of the IPCC's fourth report, and it's still too early to say what the IPCC's fifth report is going to say. The sort of draft text is out for, or will soon be out for peer review and expert comment. And I guess the sort of things that are going to be said will start to appear. People will start spreading rumors about that over the next sort of 6 months or so. But what Climate Code read, they provide a very good overview of what's been going on. And the key point that they make is that political, people who are determining the actions that we take to deal with the climate problem may well be living in what they call a bubble of outmoded policy frames that have been superseded by the pace of events in the real physical world. So in other words, whatever I may think and you may think about the pace at which the world's been thinking about cutting carbon, I'm sure, we both feel that everything has been going too slowly.
Yeah.
What's happening up north now is telling us that the climate system isn't going to wait for us to get our act together and cut carbon. The amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere now has been sufficient to decimate the Arctic sea ice and is sufficient to be causing quite probably dramatic climate changes for the northern hemisphere, and by knock on from that around the world. So it's becoming a bit of a mantra for me, but climate change is real. It's happening now, and it's too late for us to do anything about it. And there's what they talk about, outmoded policy frames. The key one that people don't focus on is what I called in Hot Topic, a quite well-established term. It's called the climate commitment, and that is the period of time that the climate system, if you like, it's the inertia built into the climate system. Because we've got 70% of the surface of the Earth is covered in oceans that take a long time to warm up. For any given amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it takes a long time for the Earth to catch up. And that's a 30-year period. So even if we could freeze the total amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at the moment, which is a shade under 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide, if we could freeze it at today's levels by some magic Harry Potterish waving of a wand, we would still have 30 years of warming in the pipeline.
Right.
And we can see today that the Arctic sea ice is in rapid decline. We're looking at emerging changes in the patterns of weather around the northern hemisphere that mean that climate change is happening. And there is literally nothing we can do for 30 years. Everything we do from now on in terms of reducing carbon emissions can only stop it getting worse in 30 years' time.
Okay, well,
and we still have politicians who don't want to do anything.
Indeed, we'll be talking more about that in future episodes. But one other thing I do want to cover off was the big news back in New Zealand over the past couple of weeks, and that was the court decision. The cranks who lost the case in the court in New Zealand, NIWA, has been awarded costs. Tell us, give us a wee backgrounder and tell us how this all started.
Well, this goes back, and I'm sure we've talked about it on the Climate Show a few times, but it goes back a couple of years when the Climate Science Coalition started to make noises about the New Zealand temperature record. They started out by saying that it was an absolute scandal, that the only reason the record showed warming in New Zealand was because people had adjusted the temperatures. And then when it was pointed out to them that the adjustments were necessary, but you couldn't stitch together a long-term record without allowing for the fact that stations move and that thermometers are changed and sites change and all the rest of it, then they came back and said, oh, well, you haven't told us how you've done it. So NIWA then said about telling them how it was done. Then they said, well, you've obviously been picking it so that it makes it too warm. So NIWA then went away and recalculated it all using the latest techniques and methodologies, came back, and it showed exactly the same thing as the old temperature record. And then basically the cranks decided that they were going to take NIWA to court. And so they were seeking a judicial review to get the judge to declare that the decisions that NIWA had taken in putting the temperature record together should be declared invalid. And fortunately, the judge took the view that two of the three expert witnesses that the Climate Science Education Trust, because they formed a trust to bring this court case, two of their expert witnesses were nothing of the sort. their advice was of no value to the court. The judge noted that the statement of claim was, as he put it, prolix, which means very long-winded and waffly.
Yeah.
And basically said that they couldn't have a judicial review and awarded costs to NIWA. So I can tell you that there were a lot of very happy climate scientists in New Zealand last week when that judgment was announced.
Well, of course, it couldn't have gone any other way, right? Couldn't have gone any other way.
Not in scientific terms, because I mean, if the climate coalition had really wanted to, address the New Zealand temperature record properly, what they should have done is constructed their own temperature record, and then published it in a peer-reviewed literature.
Yeah.
And people who understand long-term temperature records could then look at what they've done and tell them why they think they've done it wrong or accept it. And there would have been a debate between scientists in the scientific literature. But as the expert witnesses sort of fiasco demonstrated, they just don't have any scientists who can do this sort of work, or who want to do this sort of work, or who are able to do this work in a way that will get it published in the peer-reviewed literature. And so the judge basically said, look, I'm not going to try and judge the science here, but NIWA are clearly the experts in this. You are not. Therefore, I will award costs to NIWA.
Done and dusted.
Dismiss your application. So NIWA, it's conservatively reckoned that they have spent something like 100,000 New Zealand dollars on dealing with this case.
Yeah.
And those costs are going to have to be met by the Climate Science Education Trust. And so one thing to watch over the next few months is exactly what happens in terms of those costs.
Will there be an appeal,
it has
do you
been
think?
suggested.
Is it open to appeal?
Well, I guess the Climate Science Coalition are making some noises about possibly appealing. Difficult to see what grounds they might have for that. But, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to. Maybe there is some little legal thing that they can go. But the one thing they're going to need to do that is very deep pockets, because you're arguing in the High Court. It has to be done by barristers. Barristers are not the most underpaid members of our legal profession, and most barristers for this sort of case will want payment guaranteed. They're not going to work on the promise of a case of wine and some free eggs from the Barry Brill's chickens. They're going to want money, and so the Climate Science Education Trust and its supporters are going to have to come up with considerable sums if they're going to pursue this case much further. But they're going to have to come up with $100,000 to meet NIWA's costs. At least. But I guess also, so it's going to be interesting to see that.
Well, the important thing also is that the scientists get back to doing the science rather than being embroiled in these legal battles.
Yeah, I think that's right. There were a few people really very pissed off that they've had to spend so much time dealing with this, because it doesn't really matter how you calculate it. If you do it properly, you end up with pretty much the same result.
Yeah.
It's not, you can argue about the few tenths of a degree here or there, but basically New Zealand has warmed over the last 100 years, and the ice, the glaciers have melted. So you've got no way of you can't change history. New Zealand is warmer than it was. The world is warmer than it was. Arguing about temperature records is purely a political sideshow. It has nothing to do with science, and it has everything to do with making a kind of smokescreen for people who want to deny that we do anything at all about reducing carbon emissions.
Well,
so it was a great day last week, and a lot of happy people in the climate community to see that the cranks were kind of dismissed with a bloody nose.
Yes, very good. Well, there's a roundup of all that up at hot-topic.co.nz. Now, Gareth, we said we're going to make this show short and just a quick update of where we're at. We're probably already marching on over 30 minutes, and there is a whole lot of news that has happened over the past few weeks. Just one I just quickly want to mention because it affects me, and it affected me as soon as I arrived here in the UK, was the hay fever season, which I wasn't expecting, though I should have possibly. But there was an interesting article in The Guardian that was saying that climate change will extend hay fever seasons by 6 weeks, according to a report. it will cause global warming will cause earlier flowering, possibly extending the hay fever season, and enable new species to grow in the UK. Pollen is also getting more potent, which I found interesting. More potent pollen, packing more allergen into each grain. The report was from the Health Protection Agency, and it analysed a wide range of risks, including killer heat waves, increasing flooding, greater food poisoning. But this was the interesting one, of course, to come out of this was hay fever. I don't think anyone expected that, and certainly it was something that I found affected me as soon as I arrived. So I'm not looking forward to that particular side effect of climate change, Gareth.
Well, it's always possible that if Britain goes on having extremely wet summers, that will wash the pollen out of the air for you.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
I have to say, speaking as someone who likes wild mushrooms, I have to tell you that wet summers in Britain mean that the woods around London will be absolutely heaving with vast quantities of extremely good wild mushrooms. So you'll have to go and mug up on your mycology and
I need to know the right ones to pick.
Yeah, I'll give you map references for some of my old haunts that will tell you where to find the finest porcini.
Oh, okay.
We used to live opposite Bushy Park, which is very close to Hampton Court, and I used to be able to leave my house and walk into Bushy Park in a couple of minutes, just across the road basically, and then about 10 minutes walk further on I could reach a patch of wild mushrooms growing in the middle of an open paddock in this park basically, and fill several shopping bags full of these things because there was nobody else who'd eat them.
Right.
And yet they were very, 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 very fine mushrooms, and I used to be able to take them into an Italian restaurant in Teddington and swap them for pizzas.
Hey, before we go, I also want to, of course, mention that you've been very busy. In fact, you were very busy when we were last doing the climate show, putting your book together, but busy actually getting it out. The Aviator, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
I'm a few chapters in. I've just gotten the digital copy, but I see you've now got physical hard copies that people will be able to eventually get.
Yeah, absolutely. We just in the last couple of days got hold of this. It's 380 paper pages, created by a print on demand service in the USA. For those who haven't seen it, hot topic. It's the cover is by one of New Zealand's, well, probably New Zealand's top comics artists. He's a guy called Dylan Horrocks. Brilliant artist who has done just a wonderful cover for the book. I really, really love it. And so we've had the Kindle edition and the sort of other e-reader edition available for a few weeks. Now that the paper book, I just need to do a bit of proof corrections. That will be, in fact, I uploaded them today, so probably within the next couple of days I'll be pressing the button for the book to go live, and it will then be available as a paperback from Amazon and CreateSpace and a number of other sort of major internet retailers, and I'm going to start promoting it. So you can expect me to be plugging this book religiously over the next couple of months as you should. I want to bandwagon. I want a bandwagon.
Yes.
I need a bandwagon.
Well, this is your bandwagon right now. I mean, it should just quickly describe it.
Yes, absolutely. What I wanted to do was create a world where the worst impacts of climate change were being experienced, and then try and put into that world. I needed an excuse for somebody to be able to go around and see all these impacts. So I borrowed the idea of having a wanderer going around and meeting strange groups of people. And the idea was basically nicked from Jonathan Swift, who wrote a book called Gulliver's Travels. And so my Gulliver, who's called Lemmy Newman, Lemmy being short for Lemuel,
yes,
not for the bass player for Black Sabbath. So Lemmy Newman has an airship, and so he travels around the what I've called the burning world, which is a world set in the not too far distant future where the climate change is beginning to really bite. And he meets basically the surviving communities of our civilization. And so he goes to meet the last climate skeptics in their little camp in the the Western USA. He meets the deep green terrorists. He meets the techno-vegans, the people who don't want any technology at all in their lives. He meets the billionaire libertarians in their high-tech bubble. They meet the militant fundamentalists in North Africa. He goes to see the new Arctic cities being built in far northern Canada. And he sees Melbourne being burned by a firestorm. And basically a few other things in there as well. Kitchen sink. There are goats living in New Zealand that you can make a cheese that makes you live forever. So it's basically Lemmy has a base in New Zealand and then flies around the world and sort of experiences it with his girlfriend and the goats.
And from what I hear, the people who have finished it, they can't wait to find out what happens next in the Burning World series.
Absolutely, neither can I.
And also should tell you that that Michael Mann has given it the big thumbs up. He said it is a winning combination of wit and insight. So there's a gold star from Michael Mann.
Absolutely, I was very pleased with that, and also pleased with Sunny Whitelaw, who's a Hot Topic reader, but also a noted science fiction author in her own right. She gave us a very nice mention, calling it, I think, a brilliant and wickedly satirical look at a climate change future. So those sorts of comments are great, very nice to have on the cover of the book. But the proof of the pudding will be in the reading. So I'm hoping that my readers, people will discover the book, read it, enjoy it, and want more. I'm not going to give away any secrets about what's going to be in the next book, because I don't really know what those secrets are yet. I do know a few things that are going to happen, and I basically stopped the book because if I'd carried on writing, it would have turned into a 300,000 word monster. Because seriously, there's just so much to get done. I don't know what it's like. It's the first really long piece of fiction I've written.
It's like the show, though, isn't it?
When you create a world like
it's like the show, really.
Yeah.
You keep going on, and it could be a 3, 4 hour, 5 hour monster.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I'm hoping that I'll start work on the second book quite soon as we've got some of the promotion going and so on. Then I can start taking a few hours out of the day to start hanging the plot together and working out where we go. And I've got a few ideas, a few interesting things that will happen. The only question at the moment is I don't know whether I'm going to have to do a third book as well. But we'll have to see how the plot elements go.
Good stuff. All right. Well, yes, we said it would be short, so it will be shorter than the normal climate show. This was just to figure out whether or not we could make the connection, make it happen, and also catch up on some of that big climate change news over the past couple of months. But we will be back on a regular basis very soon with a full show. Guests, we'll get John Cook back on as well. And have all the features on there as well. So looking forward to that. In the meantime, check out the website. It is theclimateshow.com and hot-topic.co.nz. We'll have the links to the stuff we've been talking about. Check out the website, the Facebook page, I should say, facebook.com/theclimate show. I'm up on Twitter at twitter.com/Radio Wemo. Gareth, you're at what's your Twitter handle?
It's Hot Topic NZ.
Hot Topic NZ, and also The Climate Show on Twitter. There we go. I think we've got everything there. Gareth, take care.
We have indeed. So I think the readers and listeners and viewers should understand that this has been a proof of concept reconstitution of The Climate Show.
Yes. And
we've been recording it with it's a Google Hangout this time because that seemed better able to cope with the fact that Glenn and I are on opposite sides of the planet. Skype was struggling a bit with that. We've got one or two issues like the mobile broadband on my phone, which was supplying us with excellent quality audio at the beginning of the show, decided to run out halfway through the recording, so we're back on my normal gluey broadband here. but these are all superable obstacles, and as Glenn says, we'll be back with the full climate show loveliness and lots of exciting news, the John Cook view of the world, the Glenn talking to us from the increasingly wet and cold Britain.
Oh, good. All right. Well, that has been us for today. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll catch you next time.
What good is a drop in the ocean? What good is a drop in the